Thank you for joining me. My name is Mark, and this is a documentary breakdown. So I watched The Curious Case of Natalia Grace the other day, and it is a good one. I will say that. I've watched so many documentaries in my life, but this is definitely up there with one of the better ones. If you haven't seen it already, I suggest that you do. I believe that you can see it over on Amazon and even Discovery Plus. Today we're going to be going through the story a little bit, and at the end I will give you my 2 cents on what I make of the whole situation and as a documentary as a whole. So with no further ado, let's get on with the story. The whole story starts off with a family, the Barnett family. You got Michael and Christine and their 3 young boys. They're looking to adopt a young girl, and originally they was going to actually adopt a young girl from Haiti in 2010, but unfortunately at the time the adoption was happening, Haiti went through that devastating earthquake, which meant the adoption would then fall through. Now, of course, the Barnetts were extremely disappointed with this, but they would soon be introduced to a 6-year-old girl called Natalia. She was a young girl that was suffering from a very rare form of dwarfism. She was originally from the Ukraine, but was currently in foster care in the United States. And the Barnett family took it upon themselves to invite Natalia to become a member of their family. Almost immediately, things were starting to look as though they weren't what they expected. With Natalia's disability and of course her young age as well, on top of that, she would need assistance when having a bath. And Christine, the mother of the family, was giving Natalia a bath for the first time when she discovered that Natalia had fully formed pubic hair. This, of course, like many other people with a child of 6 years old, would be shocked to discover that they had fully formed pubic hair, but their concerns would be reinforced further when they would soon discover that she was also going through her period. Now, of course, questions would be raised about the true identity of this young girl. Now, it's not rare that an orphanage will shave off a couple of years from a kid to make them more appealing to families. But a 6-year-old with fully formed pubic hair and going through a period seemed like there was more than a couple of years involved here. But the concerns of Natalia's age would soon be put into the back burner when this story takes a bit more of a dark turn, because it would be Natalia's behavior that would become the main concern, a concern that would leave the Barnetts in fear of their own life. Natalia would begin to express that she had a strong urge to cause the family harm. Christine and Michael Barnett would claim that Natalia would quite often hold knives underneath her bed, but she seemed to take an in particular disliking to their youngest son, where quite often in the back of the family car she would soil herself and then proceed to rub fecal matter over the 6-year-old boy. Now, these unhygienic displays were not limited to the back seat of the family car. They were also brought into the family home, where Natalia would often urinate in inappropriate places. Now, this got to the point where Christine even began to start urging her sons to take revenge on Natalia by urinating over her belongings and even in her bed. Now, why the family didn't decide to have her readopted, I do not know. But it appeared as though they wanted to fight through these concerns and get Natalia the psychological help that she needed. Unfortunately, none of this really worked. After a long period of time, the family were really beginning to feel the strains to their family foundations, and it felt like an eternity since they'd actually had any quality family time together. However, determined to keep this family unit together, they decided to go out on a family trip together for one of the boys' birthdays. This young lad was fascinated by cows, and there was no better place to take him than to a dairy farm where everyone would have their own opportunity to milk their own cow. Upon their arrival to the farm, they were greeted with a waiver form. They had to sign this due to the fact that there was many electric fences dotted around the surroundings of the farm. Michael Barnett would claim that this gave a certain twinkle to Natalia's eye when hearing this information. They left the office and made their way over to the milking shed, but it wasn't too long before Natalia started becoming difficult. She was complaining that her feet hurt, which, by looking at her disabilities, I can completely understand that. Walking over rough terrain is not easy for most of us, not to mention someone that is suffering with the disabilities that Natalia had. This seemed to frustrate Christine, and she was determined to make sure that Natalia was not going to destroy this birthday trip. She advised Michael to gather up the boys and take them to the milking shed, and that she would sit back and take care of Natalia. They didn't get very far though, because it wasn't very long before Michael started hearing screams coming from his wife's direction. And when he turned round, he witnessed that Natalia was in fact trying to drag Christine towards one of the electric fences. This altercation was spiraling so much out of control that the police were in fact called. And when questioning Natalia as to why she was doing this, She answered with a stone-cold face, "I wanted to kill her." This, of course, shook the officers, but due to Natalia's young age and disabilities, they weren't exactly going to put her in handcuffs and chuck her in the back of a squad car. However, they did have her admitted into a hospital that dealt with mental health issues. During her stay at the hospital, Natalia was becoming very inappropriate with some of the male patients of the ward, getting them so fired up that this would in fact become a big concern to the members of staff at the hospital for the safety of Natalia. They advised Michael and Christine to come and collect Natalia and take her home. But this short stay in the hospital seemed to have a positive effect on Natalia. It seemed as though she wanted to make more of an effort as being a part of the family, even helping out with chores like doing the washing up. But it was in one of these small moments of normality when Natalia would yet again turn to her dark side. With Christine by her side drinking coffee and doing the washing up while Natalia rinsed off the dishes and put them on the drying rack, Christine had to leave Natalia alone for a few minutes while she dealt with something else. When she returned, she took a sip of her coffee to only be met with the overwhelming taste of bleach. When asking Natalia why she had put bleach inside Christine's coffee cup, she answered yet again with a stone-cold face, "I wanted to kill you." This was in fact the final straw that broke the camel's back for the family, and they decided to get legal advice onto what to do in this whole situation. They described the whole situation to the court, going all the way back to the very beginnings when they discovered that Natalia had fully formed pubic hair. And the courts agreed with Christine and Michael that maybe Natalia isn't quite the age that she's supposed to be. But they couldn't pinpoint exactly how old she was. But both the courts and the Barnett family had come to an agreement that if Natalia had fully formed pubic hair at the time of the adoption, then that must have made her 18 years old. That, plus adding on the years that they had been looking after Natalia, had now made her 22. Confirming with the courts and having her age legally changed to 22 was kind of a godsend to the family, because this meant now that they could move her out of the family home. And that's exactly what they did. They found Natalia in an apartment in a complex and immediately removed her from the family environment. However, regardless of her age, whether she was 10 or 22, this apartment was not suitable with someone that was struggling with the same disabilities as Natalia. She was left alone with zero assistance for the difficulties that her disability would bring. Michael and Christine would bring Natalia food, more so Michael than Christine, but many of the residents of the complex would say that it was a very rare sight to see either one of them come to visit Natalia. Even when Natalia herself tried to get outside help, upon discovering this, Michael would visit Natalia and remove all the contacts from her phone.
They're going to try and do stuff, but we showed everything to our lawyer, and our lawyer said that they can't do anything. They're not even supposed to come over here. So whatever Heather was trying with you, didn't work.
Natalia would then begin to rely on the kindness of her neighbours, but more often than not, would mainly outstay her welcome. She was slowly becoming a pest to the residents of the complex. Often they would come home from shopping or from work to discover Natalia sitting on their doorstep. And on some occasions, they would even find Natalia roaming around their property, uninvited, and helping herself to food. But the final straw for the neighbours would come when Natalia became very inappropriate with some of the younger boys from around the neighbourhood. And due to a series of complaints, the owner of the residency had no choice but to evict her. Michael and Christine were informed that Natalia could no longer live there. By now, they're beginning to feel like Natalia is like a bad penny that they just can't get rid of. And so, in a final attempt to finally get themselves rid of Natalia, they took her to a neighbourhood that was over an hour's drive away, a run-down neighbourhood, with many of its streets being occupied by homeless people and an extremely high crime rate. The logic behind their thinking for doing this was that no one would care if Natalia was there. No one would pay any attention to her. They paid the rent up front for her apartment, which again was another apartment that just did not match the needs that Natalia needed to get through her day-to-day life. Not only was there a big staircase within inside the building to reach her apartment, there was even a staircase outside the apartment to reach the building, something that Natalia would struggle with. The so-called run-down, crime-ridden and unfriendly neighbourhood, neighbours started to notice Natalia's struggles and did the opposite thing that Christine and Michael thought they would do. They had compassion. Many of them got to know Natalia, and as a result, Natalia would describe the situation that she had just gotten out of with her adoptive parents. They couldn't believe that people could be so cruel to someone that was so vulnerable and in need of help. One family in particular took huge sympathy on Natalia and invited her to leave her apartment and to come and live with them. And that's exactly what she did. They took it upon themselves to inform the police of Natalia's situation, and the police did in fact open up an investigation on Michael and Christine. But they wasn't aware of the whole scenario where Michael and Christine had in fact got Natalia's age changed. This is something that law enforcement disputed. They even went to the lengths of finding Natalia's biological mother to finally answer the question, just how old is Natalia? With a lot of hard work and dedication, they in fact discovered someone claiming to be Natalia's biological mother. And even visiting the war-stricken country that is Ukraine, they finally met up with this woman for an interview. During the interview, they got a DNA test from this lady that came back 99.999% positive that this was, in fact, Natalia's biological mother. Now, when the courts had Natalia re-aged, they stated that her birth date was around the year 1989. But Natalia's mother would confirm that this was incorrect, and that in fact, she was born in 2003. This would have meant that the time that Natalia was living on her own, she would have been between the ages of 10 years old and 14. And so Michael and Christine were charged with 2 counts of child neglect. Now, I'd love for this to be the end of the story, but unfortunately it isn't. Because for whatever reason, the courts involved in this trial didn't want to admit the fact that they were wrong in the first place by re-aging Natalia, and refused to even so much as anyone even mention the word adult or child in the courtroom. This left the jury completely unaware of Natalia's real age. When asked on the stand, Natalia had to legally say that she was born in 1989, and both Michael and Christine Barnett got away with the charges of child neglect. A lot of things popped up for me during this whole story, but we're going to go over it on a character, more of a character basis, mainly focusing on Michael Barnett and Christine Barnett. Now, Christine did not want to take part in this documentary, although she was of course featured in it heavily, but Michael Barnett seemed to want to jump at the chance of getting his story out there. By the time of the shooting of this documentary, Michael and Christine have in fact separated and were now divorced. But there was something that Michael said at the very beginning of the documentary that painted him in a bad light immediately, that just proved that he was no more than a liar and a fake. You see, throughout the entire documentary, Michael is very theatrical, very over-exaggerating everything that he says. You almost get the sense that Michael believes that this is a documentary about him and not a documentary about Natalia. He's a man that loves attention, but, as I said, he is a liar and he is a fraud. And there's one thing that Michael said at the very beginning of this documentary that nailed that home for me immediately. Now, this is something that a lot of people might see as insignificant, but for me it says a lot about his character. At the start, he talks about how wonderful the family life was, how comfortable and financially secure that they were, boasting about how big his house was and how proud he was of his fleet of cars.
Got a driveway loaded with cars in it. There's a Lamborghini in my driveway, for God's sakes.
I even had a Lamborghini on my drive. And me, much like any other person who knows anything about cars, will tell you that this car here, the so-called Lamborghini that Michael was so very proud of, is in fact one of the cheapest and most poorly put together replicas that I think I've ever seen. Now, what does this say about Michael's character? He's certainly a liar, trying to pull the wool over our eyes immediately, stating that he even had a Lamborghini on his drive, when in fact all he had really was a cardboard cutout of a Lamborghini. It shows that he wants the attention. Driving a car like this around a neighbourhood would certainly get you that. But it also shows that maybe the family isn't quite what he made it out to be in the beginning. Maybe they're not quite as financially secure as he said they are. Because after all, this so-called Lamborghini is probably worth less than the pickup truck that's parked behind it. But most of all, it shows that he's a liar. And it also shows that he's trying to be someone that he isn't. The kind of person that would want you to feel sorry for them. The kind of person that's so hungry for attention that they will do and say anything to get that attention. But what about Christine? I think Christine is a completely different person. Christine is more sinister. She's very controlling.
Natalia, look at me. Look at me. Natalia, how long have you been on this wall? Two minutes. Okay, so it's hurting you that bad in 2 minutes? All right, well, you still need to be on your wall.
She cheated with a maintenance man that would attend the house. She was sending inappropriate sext messages to husbands of friends of the family, even down to when she was trying to get information and guidance into how she should take care of Natalia due to her disabilities. She was reaching out to people that were suffering with the same disability, and some of the male members of that community that she reached out to. It didn't take long before then conversations turned sexual. She was very manipulative, especially to her husband Michael. She was starving him of sex to the point when they were getting divorced that she was bribing him with sex, providing that he would give up custody of their own children. With someone with such a controlling state of mind, makes me believe that because Natalia was also very strong-minded, she'd had to deal with a lot throughout her life. And I think that Christine knew immediately that she was unable to control Natalia. I think any attempt of her controlling Natalia was fought back by Natalia. And this made Christine very nervous. And I think one of the reasons why it made Christine very nervous was perhaps she saw Natalia as a threat into exposing this family for what they really are. Fakes. Much like a replica Lamborghini. Even the very fact that they wanted to adopt Natalia in the first place kind of paints the picture of showing off, almost. Look at how kind of a family we are. Look at how great we are. That we're going to take on this poor, helpless, disabled child into our own family. Aren't we such great people? When truly, they're just controlling and abusive. Christine would often for hours interrogate Natalia onto who she really was, making her own boys urinate in the bed of Natalia as a form of revenge, making up these lies that Natalia is somehow a dangerous human being that could any moment take their life away. Just doesn't seem to ring true, especially when you look back at the incidents at the farm. How is it possible that what we know now to be around a 9-year-old girl at the time, with a heavy disability and dysphoria to her body, be able to drag a fully grown adult woman towards an electric fence against her will? It just seems like an outrageous claim to make. But then once you've already made this mistake in inviting this strong-minded young girl who could be a threat to your family and exposing them for what they really are, how do you get rid of them? You see, over there is rules that as an adopted parent you are responsible for that child up until the age of 21 years old. Is it a coincidence that the court changed Natalia's age to 22? The only option that they had was to drive over a mile away, dump this child with disability issues into an apartment on their own in a neighbourhood that they believed she would just be left to suffer and be forgotten about. I think it's disgusting that nothing happened to either Christine or Michael over this whole situation. And now, of course, that they've been through the court system over this, they can't be charged with it again due to the double jeopardy. But there is at least a silver lining. Natalia seems to be living a happy life now. She's still with the family that took her in, and for the years that she's been living with them, none of them have had any complaints about her behaviour, no threats of her killing them, no hoarding of knives or urinating all over the place. But of course you still can't help but feel sorry for her. She's been done an extremely big injustice. Michael and Christine will never have to pay any consequences for what they did. Now, what do I think of this whole story as a documentary as a whole? As a piece of filmmaking, especially with documentaries, I always look at them with two sides. You've got a compelling story and the way that that story is told. This documentary is very much carried by the compelling story. I don't think that the way the documentary is shot, that it enhances this story in any way, shape or form. I'll be honest with you, the fact that it's a 6-part documentary at 45 minutes an episode made it drag out a little bit longer than it should have. I think it would have been a much stronger piece if it was perhaps a 4-episoder at maybe an hour. The filmmaking doesn't enhance it in any way, shape or form, but it doesn't really need to. The story is so compelling and it's so interesting to see everybody's side of it. And like I said, if you haven't already seen it, I really do urge you to go and see it, because there's so many different sides to this story. There's so many different characters involved in this story. A lot of interviews with everybody that was involved, apart from Christine, of course. But you've got Michael there, he's almost like a Joe Exotic character in the way that he behaves on camera. He is definitely a character. You've got all the people that were, you know, neighbours of Natalia when she was living on her own. And you've got people that obviously support Natalia. You've got interviews with the police detective that was opening up the investigation and finding Natalia's biological mother. It's a really interesting story, and it doesn't need to be enhanced. Of course, if it was enhanced, it would be an amazing documentary. When I say something like that, I'm talking about things like The Imposter, if you've ever seen The Imposter, which is kind of a similar story, except this guy really was a con artist. It was about a boy that had been missing for quite a while, and this guy, I believe, was in some kind of foster care. He decided one day to just phone the police up and say that he'd been kidnapped, and managed to get information from the police about a boy that was missing, and then convinced not only the police but the family involved that he was this boy that was missing, when really he wasn't. But that story, and the way that it's told and the way that the documentary is shot, really enhances the story as well. So you've got this, it doubles up. Even though it's a really interesting story, the way it's told also adds elements to the story which makes it a really compelling watch. Much like the montage of Heck, the story of Kurt Cobain. We all know the story of Kurt Cobain, but the way that that story is told, even though there's been countless documentaries about Kurt Cobain, this one, the montage of Heck, the way it's done, the way it's shot, the way it's put together, really elevates that story and really adds extra elements and enhances the story. So all in all, I would give The Curious Case of Natalia Grace probably a solid 8 out of 10, because it is a really compelling story. It does drag on just a tiny bit at the end, but I forgive it that because the story is so compelling. And like I say, if you haven't already, I strongly suggest that you go and give it a watch, because if you're into your documentaries, this is one that you will enjoy, I'm sure of it. And if you've seen it already, or if you're going to go and see it, please let me know in the comments what you think of it. And if you've got any recommendations, please also feel free to drop those into the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, why not give it a thumbs up? And if you haven't already, why not subscribe to the channel, because I'll be bringing more of these videos out very, very soon. But make sure that you hit the notification bell. Otherwise, you're not going to be notified when I bring out my next video. Until then, my friends, and whatever video that I decide to make, I hope that you take care of yourselves and each other. And until then, I will see you later.